This video is about Slaanesh and the fate of Slaanesh in Age of Sigmar. And I'm someone that thinks that Slaanesh will not be eliminated from the game. I do have some skin in the game because I'm painting a rather large army of Slaanesh right now. But I just don't think that the indications are pointing to the fact that Slaanesh will be eliminated. And this discussion came up in Warhammer Weekly last night. It's been actually something that I've been thinking about doing a video on for the past couple weeks. So I decided I'd get around to doing it. And Slaanesh has been present in Warhammer lore right from the very beginning, right from the mid-80s at least. And you could argue, for example, that the presence in Slaanesh thus far in Age of Sigmar books has not been that important, or hasn't, certainly we don't know what happened to Slaanesh. The indications are that she's been captured and that her throne is empty. She's been captured by the elves, or the elves. Beyond that, we don't know anything. But we don't know anything about the elves either. And I think that their fate is definitely going to be interconnected. If GW were to eliminate Slaanesh from the lore, I think they would do so in a far less public way. Slaanesh is mentioned very briefly in these books, but the pictures of models for Slaanesh is probably about on par with the other factions. And there is artwork of Slaanesh demons. She features a little bit in the story about how the new world came into being. So she's definitely part of the book thus far. Probably no more than the elves, yet no one thinks that they're going to be eliminated. In some ways, you could maybe argue that of the four Chaos Gods, Slaanesh is probably the least popular in terms of sales and in terms of appearance on the battlefield, obviously. Maybe. And I think that probably is true. Khorne is definitely, obviously, far more prominent. There's no indication Khorne's going to get eliminated by reading these books. I mean, that's obviously a no-brainer. But he's everywhere. But the first two books you could really say are Khorne and Nurgle. There's not a whole lot on Tzeentch. Yet again, no one thinks that Tzeentch is going to be eliminated from the game. Some people argue, well, Slaanesh is all about nudity and lust and desire. And that's not, conducive to a younger audience. These books don't really have any. Yes, Age of Sigmar is aimed at a younger audience. These books are brutal. They are full of blood and gore and everything about Nurgle and everything. Yeah, those elements are a bit more acceptable in society, you might say. Certainly, I do agree that's the case in North America. In Europe, it's kind of the opposite, right? Nudity is far more openly okay in Europe. It's violence and things in Europe that are a little bit more toned down. In the United States, it's the opposite, where everything's okay to be super violent, but if you have a bit of nudity, then kind of taboo. So GW plays into both markets, and so I'm not really sure how much of a factor that is, because it is such a difference between North American culture and European culture at this point. But what I would say is that if they were to try to eliminate Slaanesh, the beginning of the Age of Sigmar would be the best time. And again, I think you could definitely read it both ways. Time will tell, certainly. I don't really see any massive indications that Slaanesh will be eliminated, though. The White Dwarf team, for instance, did they answered questions about, or asked questions about, the elements of Age of Sigmar that they really liked, and it was a list of 10 questions. about what will happen in the lore. And they kind of got more important as they went higher and higher up. So number 10 was what happened to Slaanesh. And I would tend to again argue that if if GW as a corporation were trying to phase Slaanesh out of the game, they would do so far more quietly. They certainly wouldn't have employees very stating in magazines and on the net, "Hey, what's going on with this?" I really don't think that would be the case, that they would not draw any attention to it whatsoever. It would just be, very minimal, no references to it, and then by a year or two from now, it's just gone. But that hasn't really been the case. Also, Slaanesh is just so important in 40k. Not as important as the other Chaos Gods still, but still fairly important, and definitely a component of the Horus Heresy. There are Space Marine legions that went for that particular god. And Horus Heresy is a massive moneymaker. I can't see them just eliminating elements. And if they're to do so in Age of Sigmar, they'd almost certainly have to do it in 40k. It just wouldn't make sense. Now, the fact that Slaanesh has been captured by the elves in the Age of Sigmar really makes a lot of sense to me. In the end times, Slaanesh was one of their big enemies, the ones that they had the most confrontation with. And they've always been interconnected with one another. Tom on Warhammer Weekly was saying, well, maybe when the Dark Elves come out, there'll be kind of like a hybrid with Slaanesh involved with them as well. That's very possible. There was a Dark Elf army list in the past in which you could make a cult of Slaanesh army for the elves. So I think that's something that could very well be rehashed. Their connection, though, is obvious. Well, Slaanesh has been captured by them. But I would also point out that the Eldar in 40k have a distinctive connection to Slaanesh. In the 40k lore, if you're an Age of Sigmar fan and you don't know 40k, the Eldar essentially created Slaanesh. It was fairly directly, but not on purpose or anything like that. But the birth of Slaanesh in 40k is directly connected to the Eldar, and the Eldar are high elves in space. I've heard a few people say, well, they're not. What I would say to that is that the word Eldar is from Tolkien, and it refers to the elves in the Western world. So there's obviously a direct connection there in the way that they look and the way they operate. So there will probably be a parallel going forward when we find out about what happens to the elves. I'm almost certain we're going to find out what happens to Slaanesh, and I don't think that the faction will be eliminated. So I guess that's what I have to say on that topic, and we'll see what happens in the future. Have a good one.